All right, here we go. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I hope everyone's having a wonderful vacation. I want to explain to you what we are going to be doing on this show for the next 2 weeks, Christmas week and the week of New Year's. For the next 2 weeks, we will be playing for you the most viewed episodes from the Liz Wheeler Show for 2025 and the most impactful episodes, the episodes that either made the biggest difference or that garnered the most media attention. And we are starting that today. So without further ado, if you would subscribe to the show before we get started, I would greatly appreciate that. You can go to youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler, or we have video on Spotify now. You can find the censorship-free version of the show on Spotify just by searching The Liz Wheeler Show and hitting subscribe. Thank you to everyone who has been doing that. And without further ado, here is the best of The Liz Wheeler Show from 2025. So yesterday, Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, I should say, said that in the Discord group chat that Tyler Robinson was a part of, it was in this Discord group chat that Tyler Robinson admitted that he had killed Charlie Kirk. Kash Patel said that there were more than 20 people in that Discord chat. Therefore, more than 20 people, upwards of 30 people, knew about Charlie Kirk's murder and who committed this murder, potentially before law enforcement did. This is Director Patel. Take a look.
The FBI investigating the Kirk assassination as part of this broader pattern of anti-religious, anti-Christian violence.
We are investigating Charlie's assassination fully and completely and running out every lead related to any allegation of broader violence, and we're producing results on that we'll disclose when appropriate.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Let me just ask you a few questions about that if I could. Sure. Reports have suggested that the FBI is investigating a broader network of groups that may have had some knowledge of the shooter's plans. Can you give us any details on that, following up what you already said in public? How's the FBI working to find other potential accomplices, folks who may have known about the shooter's plans, folks who may have encouraged him? Any update on any of that?
So in terms of what we do for an interrogation perspective, we go and reach out to the family and community immediately. And we've conducted those investigations and interrogations with local law enforcement, and we're continuing to do that because those closest to the suspect are going to hopefully know the most about the suspect and his beliefs and his ideology. On top of that, unfortunately, it has been leaked that there was a Discord chat, and for those unfamiliar with it, it's a gaming chat room online that the suspect participated in. So what we're doing, we've already done, is serve legal process, not just on Discord, so that the information we gathered is sustained and held in a evidentiary posture that we could use in prosecution should it be decided to do so. And we're also going to be investigating anyone and everyone involved in that Discord chat.
Okay, very good. I see the public reports that the Discord thread had as many as 20 additional users. It sounds like you're trying to run down all of that to see if that's accurate, who else may have been on that thread, what they may have known. Is that fair to say?
It's a lot more than that, and we're running them all down.
It's a lot more than 20?
Yes, sir.
And you're running all of that together?
Every single one.
Yeah, fantastic. Let me just turn to the broader question here of anti-religious, anti-Christian violence. Let me just give you a few stats that I'm sure that you're all too familiar with.
In addition, the Deputy FBI Director, Dan Bongino, went on Newsmax to confirm that the FBI is investigating potential broader network of people who may have known about Tyler Robinson's plan to assassinate Charlie Kirk. And Bongino said that there have been significant developments in this investigation. This is Bongino.
Out there in the public space that a significant amount of the digital evidence we acquired in this case was on Discord. Now, listen, this does happen on a lot of platforms, and the difference between platforms and publishers is there's a different level of responsibility legally for them. However, individuals on that platform, it is not a safe harbor, Rob, to go on a platform and say, well, I said it publicly on said platform, so this I can threaten to kill or harass someone. It doesn't work that way. No. We'll go anywhere to look for you if we believe you committed a crime, and if we can gather enough PC, probable cause, and surpass that legal hurdle and get process done on you and arrest warrants and search warrants, we'll do it. I said this morning, and I'll say again, this is not the end of this investigation. It's not even the end of the beginning of the investigation. We've just started. the fact that we have a suspect, and everybody's obviously innocent until proven guilty in this constitutional republic we have, but we are investigating a potential broader network of people who may have known. And we've had some, I think I can tell you comfortably on your show tonight, we've had some developments in the case actually right before I came on the air. So there have been some significant developments in the case. You'll be the first to hear about it. And we hope to have more on that. Have to be careful about it right now. But we hope to have more on that within the coming hours.
Now, we know via the New York Post that the FBI is investigating a group called Armed Queers Salt Lake City. We mentioned them on the show yesterday. And I want to today dive deeper into this group, because when you realize who's behind this group, it tells you a lot about what this group is all about and what we need to do. What we need to do. Law enforcement, the federal government needs to do to stop what happened to Charlie Kirk from ever happening again. This group, Armed Queers, of course, deleted their social media presence immediately after news broke that Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. That's fairly suspicious behavior in and of itself. One of the reasons it's suspicious behavior is because what the mission statement of Armed Queers is, which is to train gay, queer, and transgender people to arm themselves and fight against capitalism and the American system. Now, to me, that's a call for violent overthrow of the U.S. government, which is against the law. Based on that alone, I would bring charges against this group, because we cannot allow wannabe terror cells to train people, to prepare, to plot, and wait until they actually carry out an act of terror to stop them. We have to stop them before these acts of violence are committed. And if your mission statement is to fight against capitalism in the American system, and you're arming yourselves to do that, then you're not talking about fighting at the ballot box. You're not talking about fighting in the court of public opinion. You're talking about violence. And that's not allowed under our current legal code here in the United States. Now, Armed Queers, this group, has 6 principles. The first principle is the armed and militant protection of queer and trans communities. The second is the end of capitalist oppression and exploitation. The third is the creation of a socialist society. The fourth is trans liberation. And the fifth and sixth are the abolition of prisons and police. Again, we are long past the point where we can read these sentences and these words. They're very deceptively framed. We can't just dismiss them as euphemisms. This is a call to overthrow the government of the United States. And it's a group that arms trans people to do this. One of the leaders of this group said at an event this past July, 2 months ago, that we are a queer and trans-led Marxist-Leninist organization. So there you have it. It's not my inference. That's the reality of what they are. So that brings us to the leader of this group, a person by the name of Ermiya Fanaeian. And I mentioned this person yesterday, and I mistakenly called Ermiya Fanaeian she yesterday because that's what the name indicates. Well, I was mistaken. Breaking news, Ermiya Fanaeian is a biological male. Ermiya Fanaeian is a man who identifies now as a woman after having quote-unquote transed in high school. What's funny is yesterday, when we were doing show prep for the show, I said to my producer, I said, Ermiya Fanaeian, what kind of name is that? It sounds like a fake name. It sounds like the name of one of these weird gaming fairy people when they want to reject their parents and their family in Western civilization, that they make up some like really weird, bizarre sounding name. That's what Ermiya Fanaeian sounds like. Well, it turns out that was exactly right. Ermiya Fanaeian is a transgender identifying person who was born a biological man. And Ermiya Fanaeian, aside even from his association with Armed Queers, and we'll get to who's behind Armed Queers in just a moment, Ermiya Fanaeian is deeply entrenched in the Democrat political apparatus. I'm not just talking about the leftist apparatus, the Democrat Party political apparatus. This is a picture of Ermiya Fanaeian on stage with Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren. You can see that on the screen. This is back, 2019? In 2019, standing on the stage with Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has her arm cozily around Ermiya Fanaeian's shoulder. We have to wonder what Elizabeth Warren's statement would be now. What was she embracing? What was she embracing? Ermiya Fanaeian worked on Elizabeth Warren's campaign. Ermiya Fanaeian was also on the payroll of the Utah Democrat State Committee. This individual, and this point is extremely important, which is why I'm making it up front before we unmask who is behind Armed Queers. It's extremely important for us to understand that Ermiya Fanaeian is not a fringe player on the left, that Ermiya Fanaeian is an accepted mainstream figure in the Democrat Party, both at the state level in Utah and at the federal level, working on Elizabeth Warren's campaign and being cozily hugged by Elizabeth Warren on stage, which means Elizabeth Warren deliberately chose to honor this man who is pretending to be a woman back in 2019. So what are the beliefs of this man, Ermiya Fanaeian, who pretends to be a woman? Well, Ermiya Fanaeian tells us himself in his own words, if your war, he says, is with trans people, then this is what's going to happen to you. Take a listen.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Hello to the committee. My name is Ermiya Fanaeian. I am a member of Armed Queers Salt Lake City, and I want to tell you I have been organizing against bills such as this one for 10 years now.
Pause it for 1 second, Spencer.
The first time I have ever had to plead to the legislature.
Just for context here, two things are important to note. This is testimony by Ermiya Fanaeian against a bill in Utah that would prohibit biological men who identify as women from going into women's bathrooms. This is what Ermiya Fanaeian is testifying against. He is also, by the way, an immigrant from Iran, a refugee from Iran, he calls himself. But that's what he's testifying against. He wants biological men to be allowed in women's bathrooms. You can continue playing the video.
The legislature to stand with trans people in the face of growing attacks against us. I was only 15 years old. At 15 years old, I had to decide whether I was going to do homework that day or advocate for my right to use the restroom in peace. Let me ask you, was I a threat at 15 years old?
Yes.
And here we are, still having to take time out of our busy days. As bills such as this one insist trans people are a threat that should be legislated away, its proponents are capitulating to a propaganda machine, led by the very forces who have been against all that's benefited women since we can remember. Where were they when reproductive freedom was on the chopping block? Where were they when domestic violence service providers are having to compete for resources? Where are they when women are without health care all across this state? They are not only nowhere to be found, but are also the very cause behind these issues as well. But somehow trans women, some of the most vulnerable and exploited women among us, are the problem? Sorry, I am completely unconvinced by the anti-trans hysteria. Sorry, Kira, I am completely unconvinced by the emotional anecdotals.
Address the chair, please.
And let me just say this. If your war is with trans people, you will lose. Since the first time I have come to you about trans rights, solidarity with the trans community continues to grow to this day. And I do not wish to be back here 10 years from now. Stand with the trans people of this state. Thank you.
If your war is with trans people, he says, you will lose. Well, Ermiya Fanaeian went on to say that for tangible change to take place in our society, violent protests and rebellions must take place. Take a listen.
Some people say that it takes a violent protest to get people to listen. Do you agree, or should they remain peaceful?
I agree. I absolutely agree. You know, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and our liberation and our rights came after the Stonewall riots. That's something that a lot of people don't like to talk about, is that, you know, the LGBTQ movement started with Stonewall riots. I wouldn't even be able to be a student at this school if it wasn't for a violent riot that took place within a span of 3 days. So I absolutely agree that sometimes violent protests and really riots and those kinds of loud rebellions must take place for tangible change.
Violent protests and rebellions must take place for tangible change. So suddenly, perhaps it's not so surprising that Ermiya Fanaeian runs a group dedicated to Marxism, to the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. But here's where it becomes even more interesting. That in and of itself, by the way, is grounds for the FBI to investigate him, as I hope they are. We know that Armed Queers is currently under FBI investigation to determine whether they had any foreknowledge of Tyler Robinson's assassination of Charlie Kirk. I don't know if there is a direct or indirect connection between Armed Queers Salt Lake City and Tyler Robinson. I don't know. I don't know whether this is just part of the widened net that the FBI director and the deputy FBI director describe, that now they are going to be investigating these radical groups that are calling for violence, that are calling for the violent overthrow of the United States, that are calling for violence against conservatives. Even if it were just that, it is necessary, it is critical, it is warranted. I suspect that we are going to find out in the days and the weeks to come that there is a direct or indirect connection between Armed Queers Salt Lake City and either Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs. I don't know what that connection will be. I don't know if members of Armed Queers followed Tyler Robinson or Lance Twiggs or vice versa. If they followed members of Armed Queers, I don't know if Tyler Robinson and his trans boyfriend attended workshops or events organized by Armed Queers. I don't know what that connection will be. Maybe the FBI already knows. Maybe Utah law enforcement already knows. We don't know. What we know is that the founder of Armed Queers says that in order for tangible change to take place, violent protests and rebellions must happen. And perhaps it should come as no surprise that Ermiya Fanaeian is also an organizer for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, the PSL. Now, if you were watching this show in July, and I know a lot of you were, but there are also a lot of people with us today who are newer to the show, I'm going to give you a little refresher of what we talked about in July when the violent anti-ICE riots broke out in Los Angeles in July. The mainstream media was very quick to do what they're doing now, which is to gaslight you and to try to form your perception of those riots. They told you that they were peaceful. They told you that it was a grassroots effort of people who had grievances against President Trump's mass deportations. And that was not true. None of that was true. It wasn't peaceful. There were violent rioters who were throwing bricks at police officers and at buildings. They were breaking windows at Los Angeles law enforcement precinct buildings. They were lighting cars on fire, pouring gasoline over the engines of cars and lighting them on fire. They were waving Palestinian flags. They were wearing the Hamas keffiyeh neckerchief that indicates that you are pro-terrorism. This was anything but a peaceful protest. And of course, the mainstream media knew that. They lied to you because they hope that you're stupid. They hope that you weren't looking at the videos of these riots themselves. But they were neither peaceful nor were they grassroots. This was not an organic gathering of people who had a grievance against their government. This was coordinated. It was organized. It was funded. And we helped unmask the organizations and the people funding the organizations that actually staged these riots. And one of the key figures behind these violent anti-ICE riots is an almost billionaire by the name of Neville Roy Singham. You've maybe never heard the name of this guy before. He's not as familiar to people on the right as, say, a George Soros is. I would argue that Neville Roy Singham is more powerful than George Soros in this moment. He's certainly more nefarious than George Soros. Neville Roy Singham, a quick backgrounder on him. He is a former technology mogul. He sold his company a couple decades ago for three quarters of $1 billion. When I say he's almost a billionaire, I think he sold it for $700 million. After he sold his company for almost $1 billion, he moved to China. He now resides in Shanghai, China. Now, you and I know this very well, that here in the United States, we have a lot of people from other countries who live in our country. Some of these people are legal, some of them are not legal. That doesn't happen in China. If you are a long-term resident of China, then you are there because the Chinese Communist Party allows you to be there. So the fact that Neville Roy Singham resides in Shanghai, China is your first red flag as to this individual. But Neville Roy Singham has a long digital footprint, a long history of being an open communist. This is not something that I'm inferring from his writing or his behavior. Neville Roy Singham is not only ideologically a communist himself, meaning he has embraced that ideology, he now uses his immense wealth to fund groups, specifically in the United States, that are motivated by communist ideology. And the purpose of these groups is to incite civil unrest. So Neville Roy Singham, for example, funds the group Students for Justice in Palestine, this pro-Hamas, anti-Israel group that caused some of the violent pro-Hamas, anti-Israel riots that we saw on college campuses just a few months back. Neville Roy Singham also funds the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The Party for Socialism and Liberation was one of the groups that was a key player in organizing the violent anti-ICE riots. They were the ones that printed a lot of the posters that showed up at these signs. They were the ones that organized these so-called rapid response teams, the people who, isn't it funny how as soon as something political happens, you have this busload of protesters as if they were just waiting to be told a location by whoever's organizing them. They just show up, these paid protesters. The Party for Socialism and Liberation is one of the groups that produces these paid protesters at whatever venue and for whatever cause the radical left deems it necessary to stage a riot against. Neville Roy Singham is part of this. Neville Roy Singham, by the way, that's his legal name. His friends know him as Roy Singham. He's married to the co-founder of Code Pink, Jody Evans. Code Pink, of course, are these radical feminists. They brand themselves as being anti-war activists. They're kind of the really crazy-looking topless feminists that'll march around like as if they're like militant, right? They'll march around as if they're soldiers, but they're not wearing any clothes to protest wars. That's Jody Evans, Code Pink. They are a radical, revolutionary, so-called anti-war organization who used to speak out against communist China, but funnily enough, after Jody Evans married Roy Singham, suddenly Code Pink started speaking highly of the Chinese Communist Party and not speaking out against the human rights abuses that the Chinese Communist Party is inflicting on the Uyghur Muslims, for example. Neville Roy Singham, the allegation against him, it seems pretty clear to me, the allegation against him is that he acts in lockstep with the Chinese Communist Party, that it is the Chinese Communist Party's agenda to incite civil unrest in the United States in order to take over as the world dominant superpower. And Neville Roy Singham takes an active part in their propaganda, not only paying these groups to incite civil unrest and violence in the United States, but by propagating their literal propaganda. And the example of that I'll give is he shares an office in Shanghai with a Chinese Communist Party propaganda firm whose goal is to brainwash the global public about the Chinese Communist Party. This man was investigated by the FBI back in the 1970s for being part of a subversive group. He funds to the tune of more money than you and I will ever see combined. He funds not only the Party for Socialism and Liberation and Students for Justice in Palestine. He funds an organization called the Answer Coalition, which is a key player in a lot of these operations. For example, when we discussed yesterday Armed Queers' trip to communist Cuba and the group NNOC, it's so confusing, all these groups. They use them like a shell game. The group that organized the trip to Cuba, NNOC, was also a member of that group. NNOC was the Roy Singham groups, was some of Roy Singham groups. This man is highly, highly tied in to these subversive organizations that are currently organizing violence in the United States. So that brings us back to Armed Queers. That brings us back to the founder of Armed Queers, Ermiya Fanaeian, this biological man who now identifies as a woman. This man, Ermiya Fanaeian, is associated with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, is an organizer for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, an organization that is funded by Neville Roy Singham. This man, this billionaire who is buddy-buddy with the Chinese Communist Party, who won't live in America, who's using his immense wealth to destabilize the United States with violence. When we unmasked Roy Singham back in July, it sparked congressional investigations. The House Oversight Committee submitted document requests telling Roy Singham that he needed to turn over evidence that would show how his finances were behind the anti-ICE riots. On the Senate side, Senator Josh Hawley also announced investigations into Roy Singham, but 2 months later, we haven't seen any result of this. And I understand that Congress is like a slow-moving beast, but this man needs to be held accountable because this man is almost singularly behind these groups, and the FBI needs to understand this. The FBI, if you're investigating, if you're dropping a wider net and investigating these radical trans groups, you have to understand all roads lead back to Roy Singham. Take Zohran Mamdani in New York City, for example. He's also tied to Roy Singham. Not only is Zohran Mamdani the communist candidate for mayor of New York City, not only is he tied to Students for Justice in Palestine, which is funded by Roy Singham, a member of, or a woman who was associated with his campaign, Alicia Singham Goodwin, is Singham's niece. Roy Singham's sister, Shanti Singham, donated to Zohran Mamdani's campaign. Roy Singham is there. He's always there. He's quiet. He's not a public-facing figure, but his money is funding subversive efforts in the United States of America. This is what I think of when I hear Stephen Miller's promise that in the name of Charlie Kirk, we will dismantle these leftist terrorist organizations. This is what we're dealing with. Start at Roy Singham and follow every dime of his money, and it will lead you to the most insidious, the most demonic, the most coordinated, organized, funded efforts to destabilize our country and kill us. Now, here's the thing. I don't understand why we don't outlaw communism in our country. And hold on a second, before you react to that. It shouldn't be illegal for you to, as an individual, buy into a communist ideology if you want to be a demonic idiot. I suppose you can feel persuaded by the communist ideology. I'm not advocating for thought police, per se. But I don't understand why we as a nation don't illegalize organized groups that advocate for communism and the violent overthrow of the United States. There was a video we had prepared for the show yesterday that I didn't end up getting a chance to play, in which a member of Armed Queers, and Spencer, was that Ermiya Fanaeian, who said, this revolution is not something that we will vote in. I'm not sure if it was that individual, but it was someone associated with this group who said, this is not a revolution that we vote in. When you are a group that is committed to the communist ideology, you're not advocating that communism happen through people's votes. You're not advocating that communism be imposed on the people through the democratic process. You're advocating for an ideology that violently destroys the civil institutions in our country and then topples the governmental structure afterward. You don't have a constitutional right to do that. You might have a constitutional right. You might be protected under First Amendment rights if you personally, again, want to be persuaded to buy into an evil ideology, but there's no law in the books that says that we have to allow communist groups. And I don't understand why we don't outlaw these groups. Again, yesterday on the show, I gave a couple of examples of specific laws that we actually already have. This is not even something that Congress necessarily has to invent. The Communist Control Act of 1954 declared that the Communist Party was a threat, and it effectively outlawed it because it restricted its legal rights. The Smith Act of 1940 criminalizes advocacy for the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. These are already laws in the books. Use them. Use them. A group that intends to incite imminent lawless action, that's against the law. Use them. I don't understand why we think that there's some inherent morality in allowing a vast network a conspiracy against the United States funded by a billionaire who has defected to a communist nation, that there's some inherent morality in the freedom to do that. There isn't. It's like the drag queen story hours. I don't understand the train of thought, the David French train of thought that says, oh, well, there's some morality just in the freedom to do that. That's one of the blessings of liberty. No, it's not one of the blessings of liberty to allow violent, transgender, Marxist, communist groups plot to kill us. There's no morality in that. And I don't understand why we as a nation don't do something about this. I know that the free speech absolutists are going to push back on this. But where is it? Did our founding fathers intend for communist conspiracy groups, this coordinated effort to destabilize the United States, did they intend to protect the freedom to do that? Because if so, I haven't read it in any of the founding documents that I have read, and I have read extensively on the founding of our country. Give me your best argument. But we have experienced a paradigm shift in our country where it should be perfectly clear to all of us that if we don't dismantle the coordinated, funded, organized, violent leftist apparatus that wants to and intends to harm us and overthrow the U.S. government, then that will happen. The question left to us as voters, as constituents, to our law enforcement, to our lawmakers, to our leaders at large, is how we're going to do that. And I want actual, concrete answers to this. Because I'm willing to live in a reality where Charlie Kirk's assassination was a news story for a week. Law enforcement conducted their investigation. Charges were filed. The FBI says they're looking into other radical groups, and then the world moves on. That's not enough. We have to demand more. We have to demand that our country's house be cleaned of communist ideology. We talked earlier in the week about how this needs to be done in colleges and universities, but it needs to be done through law enforcement as well. And law enforcement needs to start by following every dime that has come from the pockets of Neville Roy Singham. Send this to your member of Congress. They need to know.